welcome to the newest episode of Falling Upwards, the place where falling doesn't have to be scary, even if you land in the middle of a storm. But you know who isn't like a storm? She's more like a light summer breeze. It's my co-host, the lovely Maddie Armstrong. How are you doing, Maddie?
Hello. I'm talked out. Can I be the summer breeze the Isley Brothers were singing about?
Yeah.
I was on a roundtable press conferencey thingy just now, and instead of lasting an hour like they usually last, it went on for 2 hours and 19 minutes. So,
Oh my god.
yeah. Bit tired.
Well, luckily, we have someone here that is very familiar with the passage of time, however long or short it may be, and the pains that can occur because of it. You may have read her wonderful writing before. It is Stephanie Cyphers. Hey, Stephanie.
That intro makes me feel a little old, but that's okay, thank you.
No, we're all victims to the passage of time, no?
We are.
All of us.
I know, but just how you said it, I was like, I sound very old right now.
No, I meant like as a historian, knowing the passages of time. You know what? I'm just gonna stop digging this hole. Steph, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm excited to be here.
Well, as usual, we kick off our episodes with our segment called Mad News.
So, I mean, sometimes I will bring out just a general fact or story to tell people at Mad News. Sometimes I subject people to secondhand embarrassments. And because of the roundtable today, it got me thinking about this one that I once did. And I think I may have told you about it, but it was my first one, I think, ever. And I joined the call like a few minutes early, like you should. And all I could see was this young girl on screen, like no one else, you know? So I thought like if there would have been other people on it, I would be able to see. But all I could see was this one girl, and she looked like 16, and she was just staring, like blankly at the camera, and it was really awkward. And I thought it was just us two. So I muted myself and I was like, "Hi, nice to meet you. Is it just us two here?" And then silence. She kept staring, like complete silence. And then, like 10 seconds later, someone else came on screen and was like, "Hi, no, I think there's a few of us on here." And I said, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you." And she said, "Nice to meet you." And then we muted ourselves, and the host was like, "Is everyone ready?" And yeah, so that was mortifying. And I don't know if we hadn't quite started yet. But I don't know if the talent was actually on the call at that point. Because can you imagine if they were? That would have been like 10 times more embarrassing. You know what Inside Out? You know the Inside Out movies?
Yeah.
Where one emotion takes like main control. For me, it's got to be embarrassment. Embarrassment's taking the wheel for me.
Steph, have you taken Ben to see Inside Out 2 yet?
No, he is not ready to go. So he's 3, so he's not quite ready to go to the movie theater. I
Oh.
want to see it, so I'm waiting for it to come on Disney Plus, and then maybe I'll make him watch it. I'm hoping maybe later in the year or next year, we'll be able to take him because I love going to the movie theater, so I cannot
Yeah.
wait to take him for his first movie theater going experience.
See, I didn't even think of that because I would have. What was in my head is like the content, like is it right for him? You know, as opposed to can he just sit down and behave in a movie theater? I didn't even think of that.
I mean, since I'm with him all the time, that's like a big thing that I have to think about is when we're going out, if he's gonna be okay. Because even like going to a restaurant, he sits for a little bit and he's like, "Okay, I'm done. Let's go run around." And so those are things that like if we get invited to places, I sometimes have to think if that's gonna be okay for him or not.
When you're in a restaurant,
Hmm.
what's your go-to? Are you a iPad parent or are you? What are your tactics?
So we try not to do the phone when we're at dinner because we want him to like get used to being out and interacting. Every so often, if he's really bad and won't calm down, then we're like, all right, here, take the phone. But we try and have stuff with us. And if it's like some restaurants, they have like kids meals you can color on. So we try to color with him or like give him toys. Sometimes he's just in no mood. I went to lunch with my sister and my friend a couple weeks ago, and he just like kept running around. And eventually, I had to take him on a walk because he would not sit still.
Oh, little kids are like that though, aren't they? Just infinite energy.
Yes.
You just think, "How are they not tired yet?"
Yes. Or they take a 20-minute nap when they need, 2 hours or whatever, and then they're full of energy again. And I'm like, child, go to sleep.
It's so good that you're encouraging him, like, even when he's restless, to try and find, like, constructive ways of using that energy as opposed to, like, channeling it into, like, a screen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, he watches a lot of TV, but I just have the TV on because I'm that person who, like, always has it on.
Mm.
Um, but we're trying to be better about that, just because sometimes it's bad for him, but he also will, like, play something and have the TV on, and he'll watch it for a little bit, and then he'll go back to playing, so it depends on his mood, because some days he just wants to sit with me and stare at the TV, so, but I mean, everyone's like that.
Mm. Did you see Inside Out too, Maddie?
Yeah, I did. That's why it was in my head.
It's so good, isn't it?
It is.
It's so good.
Like
I think you'll love I know how much you love movie stuff, so I think you'll love it when it comes out.
Well, I love the first one, so I'm fully
mm,
expecting to cry again because I think
yeah.
I cried at the first one, and I've heard it's very emotional, especially if you're a parent, so I
Mm.
expect to have tissues.
No, because I feel like the first one touched on depression, sort of like all the things that you care about just, breaking apart, whatever. And then the second one, I don't want to spoil it for you, but that one goes more into like anxiety and the massive, you know, change you go through mentally at that age. I think it's really lovely, and you'll really appreciate it as a mother as well.
Well, and I think also part of the reason I've connected with it is I suffer from anxiety and depression. So I
Yeah.
can like relate to going through all that stuff. So that also hits me hard where sometimes I'm like, oh no, and then just, the floodgates are open.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I did also read that Pixar had like a panel of teenage girls who like every so often they would show it to make sure that what they were doing was like correct and that they weren't like,
Well, that's good.
yeah, like I think I know that for the first one because I love movie trivia. So I know for the first one that they worked with, I believe, child psychologists to make sure that they got it correct. So that's why like this one, they used teenagers so they could make sure that like the teenager feel was right.
I wonder if they're gonna do, because obviously this one's been so successful. I wonder if they'll do a third one as she, like, goes to college or something, or becomes an adult.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, if it makes money, then they'll probably go for it, but it's like just being honest. But at what point, like, do you not need them anymore,
I
Mhm.
mean, we've just had what, Despicable Me 4,
Have we? Oh, I love Despicable Me.
which, to be fair, I did also enjoy.
Is it good?
So, there is something about just Gru running about with those little minions that I could watch all day. It could just be them stealing a vending machine. Like, it's just so charming.
Mm,
I feel like they're gonna make them forever.
I hope so.
Ben's gonna be, like, 40, and he'll be like, "It's Despicable Me 28 now."
But that's something where it's fine for it to go on forever, because it's just, like, nonsense. And everyone loves Gru, Just so fun, such a fun character.
I mean, I'm excited to see it when it's on streaming because I can't go to the theater, unfortunately. Um, but the Minions in the Despicable Me movies, I love them because there's like just enough of the Minions, whereas the Minions movie just it was a little too much for me.
Too much minion.
But yeah, but I love love the Minions.
Do you, just because you've brought it up, Steph, with Ben, you've had to stay at home and kind of miss on that cinema going experience, and you've relied on streaming a lot more. Do you feel something's lost if you don't go to the cinema to see a movie, or do you genuinely still feel, actually, the value for money that I get from being able to sit at home making as much food as I want while I watch it with who I want, that's actually in some ways a good compromise?
No, I fully miss going to the theater. Like when COVID happened and we couldn't go, I missed it. And I mean, even since I've moved up to Columbus, where I live with my husband now, he's not a huge theater goer like me. So whereas when I lived back home, they had like $5 Tuesdays, so you can see new movies for yeah, for like $5, which I'm sure the price has gone up. So my sister or my mom and I, like I would go and see movies, probably at least once a month, if not more. But there are just some like action movies, for instance, I don't think seeing them on a TV is the same as seeing them in the big screen because they're made for the big screen. And then you also get the reaction of the audience with you, which sometimes that can be so entertaining. It can be annoying, but sometimes it can also be entertaining to just like listen to the reaction. So I personally miss the theater, and I have said that's one of the hardest things for me as a mom is not being able to go to the movie theater.
Did you see Spider-Man? The one with the 3 of them?
I saw that streaming,
Oh, yeah.
so I'm sure that would have been amazing to see in person. There were a couple of benefits to seeing at home because, I cried a lot. So I sometimes I know I'm gonna cry with things, but I might not have enough, like, tissues with me or whatever, so that is one good thing about being at home, but those big action tentpoles, all of the Marvel movies, they're so much better to see with an audience, in my opinion.
Yeah, you
Mm.
talking about action just made me think of, like, the Marvel ones, like so the reason I mentioned Spider-Man was that's the only film I've ever seen in the cinema where people, like, cheered out loud, when Tobey Maguire and, Andrew Garfield showed up, it was just such a cool moment, and, it was a similar experience when watching Endgame, Avengers Endgame, you know?
That's what I was thinking of exactly was Endgame.
Yeah, it's just like I mean, it's very long, so it's hard, to sit there for 3 hours, but still, if you can sit through it, it's just incredible seeing all these, like, epic scenes, on the big screen and with the fantastic audio. So yeah, it is definitely an experience to have. I do agree with you.
Well, and then especially, like, Endgame, I was thinking about when you were talking about that, when, Captain America says, "Avengers assemble," the crowd went crazy, and, like,
Mm,
there's just something about that collective experience that there's just no other feeling like that, in my opinion.
yeah.
For people that aren't familiar with Steph's work, she's a wonderful historian in general, but something that she really excels in, as someone who loves reading your work, Steph, is gender history and how I think a lot of historians working in that field really try to get more stories of women out there, not just in an academic sense, but also through mixed media, whether that's movies, whether that's books. Because we're just talking about movies and pop culture right now, are there moments when you look at historical movies being made and you're like, "Oh my goodness, the fact that this is so inaccurate," whether that is literally about the story of a woman in history or just any topic? Are there moments where you're like, "This is inaccurate, this is actually really bad and damaging because it's inaccurate?" Or do you take the view that actually, as long as it's out there and getting people wanting to learn, it's still okay if it is not entirely factual?
Honestly, it depends on the situation and topic. There's, like, a couple of different instances I can think of. So one of the instances where I'm not a fan of it, I have not seen the movie, so I wanna make sure I'm clear, I haven't seen it, I just know things about it. So, there's the movie Inglourious Basterds, which is a retelling of, like, World War II and how the Jewish soldiers end up killing Hitler, which, that idea is incredibly exciting, but at the same time, you have people who haven't studied history and who came to me and they were like, "Did that really happen?" And I was like, "No, that did not happen. That's insane." There's a show, on at least in America, I'm not sure about your way, on Amazon Prime called My Lady Jane that is which I just devoured and am obsessed with, where obviously that's not very historically accurate. I haven't read the book, I didn't know anything about it until I saw the show, but it's a reimagining/fantasy, slash fantasy of Lady Jane Grey, who is queen for 9 days. It's basically what happened if, like, she, didn't possibly get beheaded. There are some things in it that, like, overall, I really like it, but there's, like, one little story that, just as a historian and knowing that person, that I'm like, you're wrong, this would never happen with this person." But overall, like, everything else, like, there's some, like, fantasy aspects to it and some changes, totally okay with, but just this one little thing, I'm like, "This is wrong, this bothers me," but other than that, that's fine.
We've spoken about at length together how difficult it has been for you sometimes to do research on some of these women
Yeah.
because there is just so little recorded about them and that has been preserved, and there is so much extrapolation to be had. With something like, My Lady Jane, where definitely compared to the men of the time, she was still there is still very little about her. Should we almost be accepting that actually to have these fictional moments to try and fill in or bring her more to life in some way, is that almost acceptable because there is just a lack of evidence and real information?
I mean, sometimes, especially with something like this, you have to imagine because there's just not that much information. I mean, I am a I'm a royal fan in general. Like the Tudor Elizabethan time period is something I'm incredibly fascinated in. But you can look at Henry VIII and all of his wives, and you can see the difference in the research that's been done and what they have for Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn specifically, since they're the two I've studied the most personally, compared to the rest of them. Like there's not as much research, so you kind of have to guess some of that stuff that's there. Um, I think if you're doing something with fiction, I think it's a little different than if you're trying to do like a nonfiction book about that person, then you can't make stuff up because people are going to take it as
Mm,
it is, and you want to make sure that when you're sharing history that you're as accurate as you can when you're doing it in like an
mm,
academic study. Fiction is a little bit different. Other people might not feel the same way as me, but I've always kind of been of the opinion that, if it gets you interested in history, I'm okay with that. So, like Hamilton, again, I love
mm,
Hamilton, but I know that there's inaccuracies and like the fact that it's like a rapping musical, basically, um, is not necessarily something that most people would enjoy, but it's super popular. And if it gets people interested in their inaccuracies, but they go and read after, like I think that's wonderful when you have art that can make
mm.
people do that. And that's one of the things I genuinely love about art in the general sense.
I think that's a very balanced view. Otherwise, if everything is so particular that it always has to be completely accurate, even in an entertainment side of things, then there will be less people getting interested. And I do remember, like in school, there were loads of theatre kids that were obsessed with Hamilton, and we actually spoke to the lady who performed in the original Hamilton.
Philippa Sue.
Yes, yes, yeah. We actually spoke to her. So yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I agree with you on that fully.
Usually we go straight from mad news into failure, but everything just it went where it wanted to go. We go with the tides.
It is.
Um, but to bring it back to failure, we always like to ask a couple of specific questions, kicking off with, what does failure mean to you?
I don't know. I have a hard time with that because
That
I'm
was a big sigh, I'm not gonna lie. Oh my gosh.
Big time for a big question.
I heard that sigh and I was like, we're going somewhere deep here.
Yes, yes. It's just one of those things that's really hard for me to define. I try, usually am, but depression gets the better of me. I try to be an optimistic
Mm,
person and look for the good in things. Sometimes you can't do that, or sometimes it might be a while before you can
yeah.
do that. So I think that's why failure can be hard. And also because people define it differently. I mean, I've been like trying to think of that because like there's stuff that I might consider a failure that other people might not consider a failure. I mean, for instance, what
Mm,
comes to mind is a lot of times if I've applied for a job and I don't hear anything back from it, or I have an interview and I don't get that position, like, those are big failures to me. Sometimes in the end, it's for the best that I didn't get a position I applied for because it just wouldn't have worked out, or, you know, those kind of things. But sometimes when you're in that moment, you don't know. But then also as a parent, I think I'm failing all the time. But I'm also learning and changing and growing, and I'm trying to do what's best for my child. And but it's also good for him to see me fail. It's also gonna be good for him to fail because I don't wanna, I hope I'm not gonna be one of those parents who just wants to make everything all right. I'm trying to learn from my personal experiences with my parents, with other people, to, like, be as good as I can, but I feel like there's just inherently failures with that, and you kinda just have to move on from them if you can. There are days, though, where I can't and I cry, but that's how I manage things is I cry.
That's such a real view on failure though,
Mm.
because there's so many people these days that think that you have to make it all positive. Like, oh, you have to learn from this thing, or there has to be a positive outcome. Sometimes there's not, you know? Sometimes we're just not perfect, but I think the fact that you care so much proves that that's all that really matters. Like, I've never met a single parent that thought any differently to you, honestly. And my mum, she always talks about things and she sort of doubts whether she did well or not. And I'm like, you're the best mum in the world, you know, you've done incredibly. Um, so obviously I don't know what your situation's like, but from the sounds of things, you know, you're talking about moderating, um, you know, the different things that your son does, and it sounds like you're doing amazingly, you know, in a world that is so tough to do amazingly in, you know? We're like it's basically built for us to fail. So I think you're doing well.
Thank you. It can also be hard for me, as May knows, because 'cause we've talked about this. I am a perfectionist,
Yeah.
which is also related to my anxiety. So that
Yeah.
sometimes for like failure, lots of things like that sometimes makes it really harder for me because I have that perfectionism and I feel like I should always be perfect. Um, so that's something that I am working on, and currently in
Mm,
therapy, we're actually trying to get to the root cause of a lot of my feelings related to that so we could kind of move on from there. So that's gonna be interesting once that happens. Um, but yeah, it's just it's hard sometimes and everyone has such
mm.
a different perspective, but more importantly, you're always your own worst critic, so that makes it so much
Yes, our
harder.
brains are so hard on
Mm.
us.
Yes, yes.
That was so beautiful what you said though, where you said it's important for me to fail and it's important for my son to see me fail. Because I think a lot of
Mm.
parents, the idea of their child seeing them crumble or struggle, you see so many parents where they do everything they can to hide that and to be like, I don't want my kid to see me suffer, or I don't want my kid to be afraid of the things that I'm afraid of, which can happen when you fail. And yet, for you to say, actually, it's important that my son sees me fail, that's such a beautiful thing.
Mm.
Honestly, I think so having read some, like, ideas about how to raise kids, that's kind of part of it, but as I think about it, like, my mom, I loved her, she was not perfect, she was not the best mom, she tried her best, but, she nes she did what she could, but she was more of a realist, and I think that's a good thing, so that you're not always expecting the best, so that when you have the worst, you crumble and don't know where to go for it. There's the thing, where parents are like, "You can be anything you wanna be," and my mom was never that person. So, like, I'm not that I would have said I wanted to be it because there's no way, but, like, if I had said I wanna be an astronaut, she'd have been like, I don't think that's gonna work for you, Stephanie." So, like, as a kid, didn't necessarily appreciate that as an adult. I totally get that, and I think that's a good thing to try and be more realistic with your kids if possible.
Do you have a favorite failure, Steph? Another big sigh. Oh.
Well, it's just one of those things I've never thought of before, so I'm trying to think.
We ask all the good questions here.
Mm.
Trying to think about that. That's a hard question. Um, I can't think of a specific example, but I'm sure so I did student teaching for a semester, and I am sure that there were times where I thought that I was getting through to the students, but I wasn't. Um, because sometimes that just depends on the student. It could depend on the class and like the dynamic of that. Or sometimes you might just get so excited about something you can't remember to like bring it down to a level that works for everyone. I definitely tried to do that, but I'm sure that there were times where you just get that glazed look of not understanding something.
I know you and I, we've talked about the hard academia around history before. What
Mhm.
you mentioned just now about making sure that you're getting through to the kids that you're teaching, and I know even when Maddie's writing or taking photos, our objectives are always, do they connect with people? Do they resonate with people? Do they take
Yeah.
somebody somewhere?
Mhm.
And often academia can be quite a bubble. There are papers that are published that maybe a very, very small number of people will ever read. Is in some ways that a failure if, say, you're creating work or you're doing studies and they actually just never connect and land with people? What do you think?
I mean, it could be a failure. I don't know, because I think it just depends on the situation. Because especially with academia, if say I've written a paper that's in like a journal or something, I wouldn't expect a lot of people who aren't academics to read it. That it might be something that's more of students who are doing research. So, like when I was doing my thesis type of thing, like that's when I might have read some stuff that I hadn't read before. Or when I'm doing my research for my column, sometimes there's stuff that I find that, typically I would not search out. But I think when it's I think academia is a very different than, like, general like, if you release a book to the, average person, I think is more difficult, and maybe releasing a book to the general public that's not connecting, I feel like that might be more of a failure than if you're writing a paper and only, like, certain people read it, if that makes sense.
I agree, to be honest. I think, um, yeah, again, you've got quite a balanced view.
Well, like if you, and I know this has happened to you, of course, if you've taken a whole photo set of 60, 100 photos and yet only one or two get seen, is that something where you look at yourself and go, oh, that was a terrible job? Or would you go, actually, no, I did my best, even if only two photos get seen, that's still a success. It's going out there in some way.
I mean, I think for something to be a success, there's more than one criteria that can be met, you know?
Mm.
So it would have to be no one saw them or liked them, and I didn't like them either. That's, in my case. For me, if I've impressed myself,
Everybody hated it. It was hated by everyone.
then yeah, that's a failure. But for me, if I feel like I did the job that I set out to do, then how can that possibly be a failure?
Mm.
No matter who appreciates it. And I think it's the same for Stephanie.
I
Yeah.
think that's what makes it so hard to define failure because it also is very much a personal thing. Because what
Hmm.
I might view as a failure, Maddie might not view it, she might view it as a success or vice versa, that kind of thing. So I think that's what makes it really
Yeah.
hard. And some things where you're like, this could be a failure, but I'm not sure if other people are going to find it a failure.
What made you fall in love with history, Steph?
I honestly don't know. Like, I just feel like as long as I've been alive, I've always loved history. Um, some of my clearest memories start when I was in 3rd grade, which is around when I was 9 years old. I obviously had to like history before then, but this really shows you my history nerdiness that I don't know why, how it came about. but I asked for the Diary of Anne Frank when I was 9 for my birthday. I got it. I read most of it, which obviously as an adult, I'm like, I did not understand what was going on for most of that.
Mm.
But we had to, I can't remember if we had to read biographies or just a book or whatever. We had to do something and dress up. So I dressed up as Anne Frank and gave like a presentation to a class of, 9, 10, 11-year olds. And I had a teacher years later who was like, couldn't remember my name, but she was like, "You dressed up like Anne Frank, did you?" And I was like, "Yep, that's me in a nutshell."
You were never forgotten.
At least about that for sure.
See, that's a success, isn't it?
That's incredible, though. Would you say the Diary of Anne Frank is then, like, the most impactful history book on you, just for, like, all of those reasons?
I mean, that's definitely one that's impactful. Um, I I think a lot with historians, at least people I know, but I'm sure it goes with a lot of other people, that when you're a historian, you get interested in like I have been interested in lots of different eras. And I might go back to that or research it for a little bit or more likely read a book about it or whatever, go back to it or don't go back to it. So another thing that happened when I was also in third grade is we were learning about the American Civil War for the first time. One of my interests still to this day is about the Underground Railroad, and slavery. Like, I have always found that kind of stuff fascinating. Um, I enjoy going to historical sites that were part of the Underground Railroad to, like, learn about that. Harriet Tubman, for instance, I'm not sure if that's someone you know much about, but she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was a runaway slave. Eventually, she helped spy and helped the northern states. So she's someone that's always stuck out with me, and like throughout my life, on period, like on certain occasions, I might go back to her. But the Underground Railroad, anytime I see anything about it, I always want to read about it. Um, Anytime there's tutors, that kind of thing, or what's it called, the White Rose, which I'm becoming more interested in. Like that's something that I've been trying to. So like they're just different times, but like definitely the Underground Railroad. Honestly, the Tudor time period since at least eighth grade. So I would have been 14. Since then, I've always been fascinated by the Tudors and that time period, and I have very strong
Mm.
thoughts on the Tudors and how things were handled.
It's really interesting all the different things that you've been, like, fixated on. I was trying to think of, like, a link between all of them in my head, but I couldn't really find one. They're all very different.
Many incredible women involved.
True, true.
There are incredible women involved in them. So another thing that I research from time to time, but I can't do it all the time because it's too much for me, is the Holocaust. Like me as a historian, I think the like thoroughfare of interest is people. So my husband, one of the things that first got us interested in each other is that we both have a deep love of history.
Mm.
He likes to study about like the war aspect and airplanes and stuff like that, but I'm more interested in like the psychological, sociological, anthropological aspects of these. So like that's why the Civil War specifically, I look at the Underground Railroad because I like am just fascinated by people who helped with it, people who were slaves, how they came through it, and like how their mind works. So that's how I see the thoroughfare. Like even though they don't connect when you think about it a little, like when you first think about it. But that's I feel like anything I've been interested in, there's always that human aspect of it. I mean, like with World War II, I have read some books recently about women spies, which, that is something that's newer. I love that we're starting to get more of those stories about women
Mm.
because I don't think I knew that there were women spies, or if I did, it was like a side note.
Yeah, me neither. That's gotta be so cool to read about, though. I'd love to read about women spies.
Yeah, I love well, and there's one woman, her name, I think it's Virginia Hall, if I remember, and she was an American. She had a leg missing, and she was, like, feared by people, even though she had part of her leg missing. So she would find ways to, like, have her fake leg help her, or would like move things around so that when she was running from the Nazis, that they wouldn't suspect her.
That's insane.
Wow, that's cool.
Yes. When I first discovered her, I had that same look on your face. I
That is
Wow.
know.
very cool. I know it's not the same thing, but, it reminded me of I started thinking about pirates in my head and female pirates, and then I remembered you did that really good piece about a female pirate that I really liked.
Which I didn't even know was a thing until I just, like, was trying to search for people, and I was like, "Why are we not talking about this?" But again,
Mm,
you know, history is taught by the victors, and also up until, like, really the 1900s and, like, 50s even, women like, research in women hasn't been a thing. They would get rid of,
mm.
things that
Women have just been erased from history.
yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I love that more research is being done now finally because, yeah, it's important to study about men, but also there are so many women and so many queer people for that matter that are erased
Mm,
for history, but they're now getting told and we can share that. And then also there are people who can relate to that or, you know, maybe not have been like a war hero or something, but seeing that there's like some strong female that could make a difference in that person's life.
The more that is out there, the more that makes people go, "Oh, wait, I didn't know this. How can I go down that rabbit hole more?" And you never know, that will end up being a kid that will do history at uni and be like, "I read that cool article and there's still so little that I'm gonna be the next one to push that kind of research forward."
That would be so cool if because of one of my articles, someone was like, "I'm gonna research this person and do something else with it." Like, that gives me chills just thinking about that.
maybe it could happen.
Do you have a period that you've always wanted to study that you have not been able to, that you'd like to? Do you have like a period or historical figure wish list?
So I read a non or not a nonfiction, sorry, a historical fiction book that had Lamar Hetty in it, for instance. The fact that she was an actress, she came from, I think it was Austria, and, like, it's because of, like, her that we have Wi-Fi, and, like, why is this not shouted from the rooftops? Like, seriously, like,
Mm,
that's something that I need to learn more about her. Um, it's little things like that. There's not necessarily time periods that I mean, there's time periods that I need to learn more about just in general, but it's just when something piques my interest. So, I mean, like Audrey Hepburn, for instance, she just was amazing. And I know a little bit about her background. She was big with UNICEF. She helped in the Nazi, she helped in the Dutch resistance movement, if I remember correctly. And like, I just need to read more about her because that is amazing. And I just, those kind of things, that's what I've been trying to, like, read a little bit more about as I can, and just even if it's, like, a quick article, something like that. I've been enjoying just finding these random pieces, whether it's on LinkedIn or someone has sent me something and being like, "Oh, that's really cool."
Steph, what would you like to bring to the exchange today? What would you like our listeners to enjoy that you're loving?
I'm gonna bring it to musical theater because I am a huge musical theater nerd. Um, I got to see my first Broadway show last summer. I got to see Sweeney Todd, and it was one of the most amazing experiences ever. Um, I like that's something I listen to a lot. I read about a lot. One of the faculty I work with at my job actually just got back from a trip to New York, and so she forwarded me some information about Broadway, off Broadway, off Broadway. So for those out there, I don't know what people know about Broadway and theater. So Broadway, kind of look at it like the top tier, the most popular, and it's considered because the way New York City is now, apparently something to be considered on Broadway has to have a seat for 500 and above. Something to be considered off Broadway is I think it's 100 to 499 people seat theater, and then off Broadway is 99 and under, which I didn't know about that until my faculty member sent me that, but I thought that was really cool and interesting.
mm.
And sometimes when you're off Broadway, you can go on Broadway. So bringing it back to Hamilton, because apparently that's all I want to talk about today. It started on off Broadway and then it got so big that it moved on to Broadway. That's just yeah. I like I said, literally just learned that today, but I love musical theater. It's one of my favorite things, and I try and make sure I get to see at least one musical a season when they have them come around because there's just nothing like going to the theater and watching people break out and singing and dancing, which personally I love and wish my life were like, but I know not everyone feels that way.
You need to come to the West End one day, Steph.
Oh god, I would love to come to the West End. It's a dream of mine to come to the West End.
Yeah, just stay in London for like a week and hit up all the different theatres, just like one a day.
Well, maybe when I win the lottery, that can happen.
What are your top 3 musicals?
Oh my gosh, that's
Am I making is this like you picking between favourite children?
yeah, I was gonna make that joke. Um, Sweeney Todd is one of my favorites. It's dark, but it's funny, and there's just having seen Josh Groban and Annalee Ashford in the lead roles, like, it was just it was the most amazing experience. Um, Shocking no one, 6 is probably one of my new favorite musicals, which is about a retelling of Henry the Eighth's 6 wives. Um, when that came out, my joke was if there was ever a
Mm.
musical written for Stephanie, it would be 6. Another musical that I love, which typically I usually like something either on the theater or on the screen and not both. Because there's just sometimes like on the stage you just can't beat it. So for instance, like Sweeney Todd, I love the stage production. I hate the movie. It's just not my thing.
Was in the one with Helena Bonham Carter and Johnny Depp?
Yes.
Okay, so you don't vibe with that at all.
No. One of the things that bothers me the most is that they took out the chorus and like not that there's like it's really I don't know, it's just one of those things where I'm like, this isn't right. You're not getting the feel. Um, I mean, maybe I can go back and rewatch it, but I just it's one of those things I watched it and I was like, no, this is very wrong. Um, one movie so Sound of Music is a movie I love the movie, I do not like the play because like, they changed it a lot. Um, but also you have Julie Andrews in Sound of Music, so, like, it's Julie Andrews. Simple as that. I love Julie Andrews. But one musical that I actually like both on stage and on screen is Wizard of Oz, and my son has discovered Wizard of Oz. My sister Kayla was obsessed with it to the point where people would ask her what her name was, and she'd say her name was Dorothy. And she went for like 3 years in a row as Dorothy for Halloween. So like there's something about that musical that just makes me incredibly happy. And the fact that Ben loves it and he'll just like when we're watching it, when Somewhere Over the Rainbow comes on and he starts singing it, it's so special and I love it.
Oh, it's timeless, isn't it? We've all seen that in our childhoods, you know? And, like, now your three-year-old is seeing that in his, and I think that's really lovely that there's some things that we all share, no matter how old we are.
Yeah.
Unless you're born in, like, 1700, then you probably haven't seen it. But
I mean, I do have a friend who it's not a musical she likes, which I'm just like, "You're wrong, but you're allowed to be wrong." That's another story. But so I don't know if you know, Maddie, my mom passed away 2 years ago from breast cancer. Um,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. So she didn't get to know like, she was in Ben's life for a little bit, but not very long. She passed away when he was, I think, 10 months. Um, but my mom was a huge musical theater lover and is the reason I love musical theater because I'm so much like my mom. It's scary sometimes. But my sister is constantly saying how mom would just love the fact that Ben loves Wizard of Oz, and it's so true. But I love it.
Maddie, would you like to give us your sign-off message, please?
You know, I should have thought about this beforehand.
I mean, I haven't either, so we're going into it all wild today.
Okay. Just because of the events of today, I'm gonna say don't be scared to just leave Zoom calls unannounced, like without saying bye or anything. Just slip away. If it's going on for like 2.5 hours, just go, you know? I was one of the first in the queue to do I could have just left, but I sat there for hours, and I did not need to be, so just leave. Maybe not this one, though.
I will say double cleanse. Keep your skin clear. Don't leave.
You're always telling us to wash, Emma. You're always telling us to be clean.
Usually I'm drawing off like things that have happened to me in the day, as you have. And for me, I was just thinking about, I've had to put on and take off a lot of makeup recently, a lot more than I'm used to. And some days I'll get back late and I'll do one cleanse, and then I'll be like, oh, am I lazy? Am I just going to go into bed? And then I think about my skin, and I've not like named my skin or anything because I'm not that nuts yet. But like, I think about my skin and I think that, if my skin was like a little emotion, like inside out, I'd be crying, being like, you're being neglectful. And then I go and I do another proper cleanse. And it's the double cleanse. You can't just rely on one sweet to take everything off.
Especially if you've been wearing makeup.
Exactly. Do double cleanse your face. Your skin will thank you for it.
And Stephanie?
I feel like the first thing that comes into my head is more serious. So I apologize for bringing it down.
No, go for serious. We've had people tell jokes. We've had people say random stuff. We've had people go deep. Whatever your truth is your truth.
Well, my truth is that it is okay to cry, and that goes for anyone. It's okay to cry. Something I'm trying to teach my son, that it's okay to cry. To me, crying is another emotion because I cry for everything. So, happy, sad, whatever, angry, I cry. And it's okay if you cry. Like, being a sensitive person, being a sensitive child, it felt wrong, but it's not wrong. It's just who you are. And if you need to cry, sometimes you just need to cry.
That's beautiful. Especially a lot of like young men, young boys are told not to cry at all, which is just wrong.
Definitely. It's better to be a big feeler than someone that doesn't feel.
Yeah, and I agree because my 3-year-old cries a lot because he's a 3-year-old, and it is what it is. Like, that's what they do. They get hurt. And I don't want him to think that I'm like not acknowledging that, or I'm ignoring him or telling him not to do that. So if he needs to cry, it's fine. He can sit on my lap and cry, and then we'll talk about it.
I love that.
That's lovely.
We've got a nice spread of messages here because it's gone from don't be afraid to leave a Zoom call to double cleanse your face to it's okay to cry. I feel like that's like
you're doing all three at once.
It's like a toolkit for self-care. Leave if you have to, wash your face, and cry if you need to.
No, you could literally do all three at once though. Like the Zoom call, because it went on for so long, made you cry, so you left, and then you washed your face to get the makeup off. So you didn't need makeup on anymore.
It's so true.
Well, it's been an absolute and utter pleasure having you on this episode, Steph.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy we could make this happen.
Woo! Thanks everyone for tuning in as usual. Bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.